Good evening, cohort. One of my areas of expertise, which I also teach at Fuller, is community organizing. And the truth is that community organizing has quite a bit to teach us about leadership. So this little video begins, it's a very initial presentation, but I hope that it will still be useful. So what I'm going to talk to you about tonight is what exactly community organizing offers to the practice of leading change. And I want to start by saying that when you lead a community organization or a community organizing effort, what you're doing is leading organizations to lead change. So let me talk a little bit about what community organizing is, and you'll understand that. So community organizing is collective action for collective transformation towards the common good. So it's when a number of people come together in a community to achieve something for the benefit of that community, not individuals achieving something for the community, like a scientist who discovers the vaccine against polio, not a community helping individuals, like a tutoring program would be a community helping individuals. You want those individuals to succeed. No, community organizing is a community of people coming together to improve their community, to create some kind of necessary and beneficial change in their community towards the common good. So the common good is an assumption in community organizing that that's what you're pursuing. You're pursuing something that is good for everyone, and that's why everyone, or a large group of people, will get involved in helping to make it happen. Now, community organizing actually usually includes not only people pooling their resources, but people taking a serious look at public decision making in their community. So a public decision is a decision that somebody makes that affects the whole community. So private decisions are decisions I make that affect my family, that affect my small business, maybe part of my block, maybe my little church. A public decision is a decision that impacts a lot of people. In a democracy, a public decision is made often by a representative, but is made through the efforts of a group of people. So some people talk about community organizing as making democracy work, that helping a group of people to come together and to influence our representatives, our public decision makers. At the same time, a good community organization in a democracy has to influence the public, because if you don't influence the public will not come together to influence representatives. So this is a typical process in community organizing, is to figure out how you're going to convince the public of the change that you would like to see made, and how you would engage the public in convincing your representatives, your public decision makers, to make that change. Now, if you're not in a democracy, it doesn't mean that community organizing is useless, because there are still ways, even when there are not formal structures for influencing public decision makers, that public decision makers can be influenced by large groups of people in their communities. It's just a little bit less structured when you do it in a place that's not as democratic. Community organizing, even though it's for the common good, usually recognizes that in order to achieve the common good, you have to notice that some people are marginalized. And you have to make sure to center and to remember and to honor those who have been at the outskirts, whose interests have not been cared for. A phrase that's common in community organizing is the canary in the mine. You know, before modern times, when we had modern technology, the miners who would go deep into the ground would carry a little canary with them, because a canary is a little yellow bird, for those of you who don't know canaries, because there is a poisonous invisible gas that often begins to build up in a mine, and if it gets to a certain point, it will explode and everyone in the mine will die. Well, the canary would feel in its little lungs that gas long before anybody else did. When the canary keeled over then everybody would have to run out, and then they would be saved from dying in the explosion. I remember once telling this story when my daughter was 5 and she started crying and she said, "Mommy, what happened to the canary?" I was like, "Oh, they took him with them. They took him with them." Anyhow, so the people on the margins of any society are understood to be the canary in the mine shaft. That they say that when everyone gets a cold, the poor get pneumonia. So it's really for the benefit of the whole to pay particular attention to those whose needs and concerns and interests have been marginalized in the process of public decision making. Because the focus is on the common good and the inclusion of everyone, community organizing typically urges that there be justice in the process. That as people come together to seek a change that will benefit everyone, and particularly the marginalized, or initially the marginalized, you have to work together in a way that includes everyone. So if you don't have justice in the process, you won't have justice in the end. There are a number of streams of community organizing. There are forms of community development or transformational development. It's referred to as development, but it actually has a strong community organizing focus. There's classic community organizing, which you might have heard of Saul Alinsky in the United States. That would be a tradition of classic community organizing. There's advocacy, there's activism, and there's something fairly new in the world, although it started in the 20th century, which is called transformational organizing. So I do not have time to go through all of these with you right now, but if you're curious about any of it, I'm happy to give you resources to read. So this little diagram that you can see here is really portrays, in a humorous way, what happens in community organizing. That people who have been at the mercy of the powerful come together and therefore can get the powerful to pay attention to them. So what do we learn from community organizing about leading change? So when Dr. Matos was laying out the different models, the different frameworks, I kept thinking that the community organizing framework was just missing. The political framework, which talks about power, as you heard the excerpt from the Game of Thrones, is really focused on power over. How do I get power and hold on to it so that I will be safe and be able to pursue my interests unopposed or unimpeded, maybe is a better word. You're opposed in Game of Thrones, but you're hopefully not impeded because you're trying to hold on to power. It's power over. That's not, you could say that this is a political framework because it does notice power and care about power, but the goal is not power over in community organizing. The goal is power with. The goal is to share power. The goal is relational power. So when all those little fish come together, they build a relationship which makes them more powerful than any of them would be individually. And the goal is to share power with the people in charge, to get the people in charge to share power so that everybody will have a voice. Because the sense is that the understanding of community organizing is that if everybody has a voice, that the ultimate outcome will be more likely to benefit everyone, to be the common good. So the first thing that I would want you to learn from that is that that can be a goal of your leadership. That as you lead change, one of your goals can be to build shared power or relational power, power with, so that people in power or who have more power than you in your organization would share power with everyone so that everyone would have a say, so that the ultimate outcome would benefit everyone. In order to do that, that doesn't happen by snapping your finger, obviously. The first step is that you have to understand. You have to really understand what are the interests of the people who in power, what are their values, what are their concerns, and what are their goals. And when I say the people in power, I want to take us back, the people who are making the public decisions, right? The decisions that affect us all. So you have to really study them. You have to really listen. You cannot create change in community organizing unless you really understand the people whose decisions you are trying to change. And in classic community organizing, you're always looking two directions. You need to understand the public because the public is ultimately going to influence the public decision makers. And you have to understand the specific public decision makers. Who are they? Who have they been historically? What kinds of decisions have they made? Because you really need to find a way to motivate both the public and the people who are public decision makers. And some of the ways that are classic for people to motivate are to look for, first of all, to pursue convergence, to look for common interests. That where do you have interests in common? Where do the people who are often being left out actually have interest in common with the public decision makers? So, for example, when we were working on advocacy, which is the process of influencing public decision makers, when we were working on advocacy for World Vision, we had to convince legislators in the United States to allocate funds to save the lives of children under the age of 5 in Africa. Now, why would they do that? What was their shared interest? Well, you can actually make a pretty good case that development lowers threat. That if you are engaged in development, if you're a wealthy country, that the people in that country are less miserable and much more grateful to you and less likely to attack you. So, actually that sounds not dependable, but actually there's a lot of data that it does increase security to increase development, to save the lives of children. So that's an example of finding a convergence of interests. You can also, if you understand someone, you know how to influence them. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that next week because we're going to talk about power maps. If you understand them, you can also encourage them. Encourage means literally the process of giving courage. That many times we have values, we have deep beliefs, but we're frightened to live by them. And so to encourage somebody is to help them find the courage to live by what they believe. So working to affect the decisions of people in power isn't always harsh. Sometimes it's very loving, and sometimes it's both at once. Like if anybody's ever pushed you to do what you deep in your heart knew was best to do, sometimes you want to thank them for that, right? You're glad that they pushed you to do it, or they're glad that they got you to do it because it was really best for you in the end, as well as for everyone else. And sometimes it involves applying a critical mass of pressure towards the change you seek. Now, in faith-rooted organizing, which is a stream of community organizing, there's faith-based community organizing, where people of faith have an important role, and there's faith-rooted community organizing, where people of faith actually organize in a way that conforms to their deepest beliefs. So I want to talk to you a little bit about the serpent-dove model for motivating public decision makers in faith-rooted community organizing. So we think that Jesus's exhortation to be wise as serpents and innocent as doves was just amazing advice for organizing, because to utilize serpent wisdom is to be real, that people are often motivated by self-interest, that people often want power and hold on to power, and to be wise as serpents is to recognize that and to act on that information. But if you think that people are only their carnal and sinful selves, then you're an atheist because you don't believe that the image of God is present in them. You're an atheist in the public sphere, even if you're a Christian privately, because then you're not believing that the image of God is in that person, and you're not believing that the Holy Spirit is alive and well and moving throughout the world and working to influence people, so that anybody can be suddenly capable of amazing acts of sacrificial love and moral courage. So to be innocent as doves is to know that about people, to know that we are more than our carnal selves, and to try to help people to be their best selves. So to be wise as serpents is to take seriously our worst self, the worst self of the person you're trying to influence or organize, and to believe as innocent as a dove is to have an open heart to believe in their best self. Now, it's not somehow less important to be as wise as a serpent. I really love this story in Luke 18, because I think this story is a really good example of what we might call faithful serpent wisdom or serpent power. That it starts with a widow. Now, widows are people that don't have a lot of power in our world, that never have, probably never will have a lot of power in our world. So in this story that Jesus tells, this widow has been treated unjustly, and the only person who can make things right, who can give her justice, is an unjust judge. He's a man who doesn't fear God or respect people. So what would you do if you were a widow and you were treated unjustly, and the only person that could make it right, is a jerk? Well, if you don't have faith, the normal reaction would be to do nothing, right? To give up, because what are you going to do? But Jesus uses this woman, this widow, as an example of faith, because she believes so deeply in the God of justice, the God of the Exodus, that she goes to this unjust judge over and over and over again, expecting God to act through him in spite of who he is. And, if we look at this, I hope you've been reading it while I've been talking to you. She wins. But she doesn't win because she has converted him or awakened the image of God in him. Look at why she wins. The judge, Jesus, makes sure that we know that the judge has not changed. Though I neither fear God nor regard man, yet because this widow bothers me, I will vindicate her, or she will wear me out by her continual cunning. So she is exercising a critical mass of pressure. She is demonstrating to his sinful self that the pain of not changing is worse than the pain of changing. And all of us who are parents or grandparents know that you can't always be sweet to your kids. Sometimes they need a critical mass of pressure in order to get out of that place of being stuck in their carnal and sinful self. So our Lord tells us that this is something that we have to do, and it can be a faithful thing to do. However, that's not, of course, all we need to do. So I'm going to share with you another biblical story. King David was not an unjust judge. He did love God. He did fear God and love people, but not always. He had a very important lapse in his life when he decided that he would act like all the other kings and stay home while he sent his people off to war to fight for him. And he was at home and he looked out his window and he saw a beautiful woman sunbathing on the roof of the house next door. And she was the wife of his leading general. And, he was tempted and he did what kings do. He took her home and had his way with her and sent her home. And then later she let him know that she was pregnant. And, if he really had been an unjust judge, she would have had a little accident. But because underneath he was someone who feared God and loved people, respected people, he desperately tried to figure out a way out of the predicament. First, he brought her husband home from the war, hoping that he would sleep with his wife and think that the baby was his. But her husband had too much integrity, and he wouldn't sleep with his wife, while his soldiers couldn't sleep with their wives. And so then King David sends him back into the battle, but he sends another general with him to take him deep behind enemy lines so that he will be killed by the enemy, and King David can marry this woman and add her to his harem, which of course is what happened. So everything's fine, right? The man's dead. He brings her into his harem, but of course it's not fine. I mean, it's not fine with God, but don't you think also that everyone knows? There's rumors all over the palace. It has undercut David's capacity to lead because his capacity to lead is rooted in his faithfulness to God. So God sends Nathan to speak truth to power, just like the widow, but also not like the widow. So let's look at this together. So the Lord sent Nathan to David. When he came to him, he said, there were 2 men in a certain town, one rich and the other poor. The rich man had a very large number of sheep and cattle, but the poor man had nothing except one little ewe lamb he had bought. He raised it. It grew up with him and his children. It shared his food, drank from his cup, and even slept in his arms. It was like a daughter to him. Now a traveler came to the rich man, but the rich man refrained from taking one of his own sheep or cattle to prepare a meal for the traveler who had come to him. Instead, he took the ewe lamb that belonged to the poor man and prepared for the one who had come to him. David burned with anger against the man and said to Nathan, "As surely as the Lord lives, the man who did this must die. He must pay for that lamb 4 times over because he did such a thing and had no pity." Then Nathan said to David, "You are the man." Then David said to Nathan, "I have sinned against the Lord." Nathan replied, "The Lord has taken away your sin. You are not going to die." Now, that's only some of the verses in that scripture, but I think we can see here that Nathan is doing something different. He's not just applying a critical mass of pressure, he's awakening David's heart. He's awakening David's sense of justice. He's awakening David's love and David's faith. Remember that David's first occupation was as a shepherd. So he's bringing out the best in David, and that's what dove power does. So I give you this serpent dove model because it actually is effective not only for leading change in the community, but sometimes for leading change in organizations as well, within organizations. And it's certainly very well suited for creating organizations that can lead change in communities. Now, I have one more concept to share with you, but I'm actually going to do it in a next video because this video is too long. So in just a minute, I'll do another one. Thank you.